Thank you for joining us. This is Studio A3R, and I'm Jennifer Sertl. And first, I want to thank Anthony Molina for the really great music to begin our program. I want you to know that I'm here today in Rochester, New York, actually at ROC Vox, which is the studio, and I'm with Scott Fitzgerald, who is our producer.
Hi.
And
good morning, Jennifer.
Yay. Before we start just kind of catching up, I just want to remind everyone that Studio A3R is a program designed to help leaders navigate complexity, where we focus on the four questions. The four questions being, where have you been? What have you learned? Where are you going? And what is required? I always like to begin by catching up with my producer and seeing what's new in his world. What's up, Scott?
Oh, just, everything. It's, I'm happy. It's been crazy. It's been very busy. And as you might guess, there's a lot of people doing virtual things. So it's been a blessing for me. Unfortunately, I'm not proud of the fact that it's been great for me on the backs of others' misery. But, you have to take what's given to you and make the best of it. And that's what we're doing here. So a lot of podcasts happening, a lot of voiceovers, some new audiobooks in the works. So, and learning about leadership with you, which is the highlight of my week.
It's so exciting. In my world, I obviously have a 13-year-old son who's getting ready to go back to school. We've chosen a blended approach. He'll be going to school 2 days a week, we hope. So I'm shout out to all the parents and all the teachers, and hopes that wherever you are, you're able to do what you can to get connected, and just a lot of compassion out there for how education's being disrupted. And, just that's what's on my mind. And we also decided to get a puppy. We have a Siberian Husky. Her name is Brienne. If any of you
She's
seen
gorgeous.
Game of Thrones, I'll have to throw in a picture, but Game of Thrones, Brienne was the soldier that was a female soldier, very principled. And so we do hope that Brienne
of Toth.
Yes, so we have Brianna Fairport, and we do hope that she, her grandfather ran in the Iditarod, and we do hope that she honors some principles. And right now, I hate to say it, it's just more work than I thought it would be. But let's go. Let's go back to leadership. And every program is amazing and exciting, but it's really one of my greatest opportunities to introduce some friends and people that I've been admiring for really over a decade. Today, we have Michael Bauwens, who is the founder of the P2P Foundation. P2P means peer-to-peer foundation. He and I just recently learned that he left corporate America at the same time that I did to do his thing. And with that, Michel, it's an honor to have you here today.
It's great, Jennifer, and I notice a portrait of Eleanor Ostrom in the background, if I'm not mistaken, which is really great. She's also my own patron saint. And if I remember it correctly, was it in Kyoto or Osaka that we met 10 years ago?
We met in Osaka, and we took a day trip to Kyoto. And
that's it. So both my recollections were true then.
And we had some of the best wine. I think it's still one of my favorite pictures that has been taken of me having fun on a trip. So you'll probably see me re-socialize that picture, although I really want a new picture of us working together.
Yes, though that's in real life is going to be rather difficult in these times.
It is. So please share with me, I think you're very brave because you jumped off very quickly. And so where have you been, and what caused you to make some of the fundamental changes early on that you did?
Yes, well, I was pretty radical in my younger years, but then, you see that the change is not working out like you would like to. And so kind of gradually adapted to, the society as it appeared to exist. And, I started more or less a corporate career. I worked for the United States Information Agency for 9 years, British Petroleum, started to internet startups in the 90s. So mostly around knowledge management. That was kind of the driving thread. But by the mid 90s, I really started feeling very uneasy again. All the ecological indicators were going red. There was renewed social tension. It was a time of the globalization movement, etc. But mostly internally to the corporation I was working, I saw this kind of more and more restricted mode of consciousness. So, this is a joke, but you have these two traders talking with each other, and one says, it's really important we think about the long term again, and the other guy says, yeah, 20 seconds. Anyway, that's a bad joke, but really, if you were working at the top levels of management as I was, what was happening was that 3 months was really the maximum you could look forward to. So everything was more and more restrained in time. I felt psychologically people were getting more and more unhappy because of this. So because the meaning and the purpose and the mission weren't really visible. And so for all these reasons, I thought, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? And I decided I was part of the problem. And at that time, certainly, I thought that the corporations could only respond to pressure, but they wouldn't be the origin of the change. And what that meant is that I had to go to civil society, and I took a 2-year sabbatical because I actually didn't really know how I should do that, right? So how do we change the world is a very big question, and we don't even know if we can. But anyway, so for 2 years, I then took a sabbatical to study phase transitions. So I looked at, the end of the Roman Empire, the 10th, 11th century, the 15th, 16th century, and then so mostly in Europe because, I'm European and that's what I'm familiar with. But still so much to read and to learn, in these topics. And I came with a few conclusions, and if you don't mind, I very quickly share them. One thing from the past was the importance of seed forms. In other words, the kind of idea that you take power and then you change is not necessarily the way that change proceeds. There's, before things explode, there's a fairly long period of people planting the seeds of change by changing their life practices and changing the economy. So basically, if you have a crisis in a system, the solutions have to come outside of the logic of that system. And so by looking at those seed forms, then you can start saying, well, it looks like the new world that is emerging out of the old is going to have this and this and that pattern inside of it, right? So take the 15th century. They had invented purgatory, which suddenly allowed Christians to lend money, because before that they would go straight to hell. So that was like an ideological change. Then you had the invention of the printing press, and suddenly ideas could spread very fast. And you had the invention of double entry book accounting, etc., etc. And basically, if you put them all together, you start getting a sense that a new system is being born, and that would eventually become capitalism. Right? And so I think my bet, this is the other change that I propose, the other observation I made, is that today, at least, what we see is the emergence of open collaborative systems. So we're moving away from closed entities, like membership-based corporations, to much more flexible systems that rely on digital infrastructure, and where people can come in and out as they wish. Of course, that's kind of like the absolute vision of this polarity. In reality, it's a bit more hybrid and complex, but still, I think this is a fundamental innovation. And this is what I call peer-to-peer, the ability to create systems, to connect, to interact, independent, if you want, from your physical place. And you could actually say also of time, because there's asynchronous communication, and to create collaborations that have a different scale than the physical scale. And so now what we have is two worlds. The world that we know, the territorial world, the local world, the world of your family or your factory, but also we are building this kind of new layer on top of it, which is, what Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere. So it's a sphere of interconnected knowledge, but it's really interconnected people. So peer-to-peer means the ability to engage as peers in a commonly chosen project and the ability to create value together according to the rules of that community, what I call the productive community. So that's kind of the main line of my thinking as I came out of this 2 year sabbatical. So we're talking around 2005, and then I started the P2P Foundation. Once I had a vision of what my strategy would be, I created this organization.
Wow. As recently as 2 weeks ago, on one of your posts, you had the phrase distributed intelligence. And I had always seen distributed relative to cryptocurrency and, distributed and decentralized relative to technology systems. And when you wrote that post, it was the first time that I'd actually seen it relative to collective intelligence. Can you just tell me a little bit, when you wrote that, did you hear any noise go off, like fireworks like I did?
No, because for me, this is basically how I started. So most people see peer-to-peer as a technological system, computers that can interact with each other without going through a server. But from the very beginning, I said, this is a people system, because what you can do with computers, you can do with people. So peer-to-peer is also a system that allows people to connect with each other permissionlessly, right? Again, it's not pure, because if you look at Facebook, you see the front end is peer-to-peer, but the back end is very centralized. But still, we should not forget this. We're still allowing 2 billion people to communicate with each other. And yes, they have to pass through private platform, and that might be problematic. For me, it is, but so I'm from Belgium. I now live in Thailand since 2003. But I remember going to Ostend, and there was a community fisheries project where consumers got together and made a deal with the fishermen, and they basically could pre-order part of their fishing expedition, and so everything was organized through Facebook. So what I'm saying is, yes, of course it's private and there's a lot of issues around it, but it still allows people to engage and self-organize peer-to-peer systems of production and distribution of value. And so it facilitates not just a centralization through big data, but it also facilitates on the other side a multitude of bottom-up grassroots alternative projects. And people tend to be pessimistic and only see the things that they don't like and that are going wrong, but they don't see that it's also a vehicle for quite fundamental change. And this, I believe, are the seed forms of the society that is coming.
Wow. And did I hear you correctly? Are there 2 billion people on the foundation network behind the front end?
No. Facebook. I'm talking about Facebook.
Oh, got it. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But so we have a wiki in the P2P Foundation, which is actually doing quite well, and we have about 75 million views so far.
Wow.
And every year 30% more. So people are really using our resource base. It's not just there for a few researchers.
No, and I think more and more people. I think it is a tipping point for the P2P Foundation. Only that you've been to the future already and are more prepared. Would that be a fair statement? That you're prepared for this moment in ways that many have not been, and so people are seeking new ways of organizing. And you, what I love about you in particular is that you've never created a formula. You've always been sharing information, and it's almost more like a swarm. When I look at birds together, there's more of a swarm. Yeah. And so I see it more of a swarm than it is there's a way. It's actually been
yes.
too much, almost like if you want to look yeah, go ahead.
So we define the P2P Foundation as a pluralist network, and so we want to kind of be a platform for all the people who think that peer-to-peer and the commons are good things, but without really knowing, what the precise strategy or tactics would be to get there, right? So it's based on a dialogue with all these people, and I have, of course, my own ideas. I developed what I call a peer-to-peer theory, but I'm not imposing it on everybody who uses our resources. Um, the way I see it is every perspective illuminates part of reality. So if you look at reality from a peer-to-peer commons point of view, I'm going to see things, which is what you alluded to before everybody else, because I had that perspective already in 2003. So I kind of, had this vision of what was coming, and most of what I wrote then, I'm not ashamed to show it today, because a lot of these things came to pass. But of course, every perspective also doesn't see things. So for me, it's interesting to talk, for example, with degrowth people, because they see things that I don't see, or post-growth people, or so there's a lot of movements are emerging today, and they have their particular way of seeing things. But my view is that the object that we're looking at, society, which is a very complex subject, is illuminated differently by all these different perspectives, and by learning from each other, we get a better view of what that object is.
Wow. I love learning from you that your process really began unplugging and going into almost a cocoon. You were in a cocoon for about 2 years doing research. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
In terms of
So in French they say reculer pour mieux avancer, right? So sorry that I interrupted you. So to go back to advance more later, or you could say, like in psychoanalytic terms, they call it regression in service of the ego. So basically, you have to go back to an earlier form of complexity to look at your roots and foundations. And so once you get that better, then you can emerge from there in a much stronger position. So sometimes it's necessary to do that, is to, go out of the marketplace and the busyness of the agora, and meditate and think and read, in order to emerge stronger afterwards. So we don't have to be always in the froth and the foam of the ocean. We can also go down to the undercurrents once in a while. That is really necessary.
the reason I wanted to come back to that point is that I think many of our listeners are more in the capitalistic framework and much more in an American framework that says all success is linear. And people that are going through choices are afraid to take time out because they're afraid they're going to lose their position. And I just really hope you're hearing that often going back to fundamentals and going back to first principles and taking time is an important part of emerging relevant. Even a lot of the skills that people have for this existing moment will not be useful tools in where we're headed. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but I think it's also psychological. So when you start becoming unhappy with some situation, you don't like your job anymore, it has lost meaning for you. What you know is what you don't like. So you know that you no longer want to be there, but actually finding out what's really the next step for you, that's not the given. And I think so. If you are in that case, kind of just jumping at every opportunity might not be the right thing to do. It would probably be better for a while to really create some situation where you can think through what the next step should be. And often that, it's not just about the society outside of you. It's really going back to your own roots and fundamental values. What's the ultimate thing that you're ready to live for? I would even say to die for, but maybe that's a bit exaggerated. But so I hope you get what I mean. It's like you it's called, William James calls it interestingly, he calls it centroversion. So you have introversion and extroversion. And what he calls centroversion is that, until you're 40, you basically try to adapt to the world. You have your heritage, your family, your education, whatever, all the stuff you get from society, and you're trying to fit in and find your way. But then there's a point, for some people at least, where they get into a crisis, but when they come out of it, they actually decide, this is what I want. This is what I want to fight for, what I want to live for. And no matter what the world says about it, I'm going to go for it, right? If you can reach that place, it's like a nuclear bomb, really. It's a very powerful way, because I'm going to warn the people who want to do this. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful, but it just means you're going to have the force to go through difficult periods with a lot more resilience than if you don't have that.
Right. I think when I think about Scott and the way that he kind of introduced himself, in a way, I'm also thriving, and we feel guilty because the inequity in the United States is so great. But in a way, we are primed for this, and I think that we are clear. Scott? Am I speaking out of turn here?
No, I'm following you 100%, and you're right.
Yeah, so like the people that have gone through that evolution of the introspection to know what they stand for, even in the chaos, feel ready, because we can't lose our vision of who we are, and doesn't matter what's happening in the economy, doesn't matter what's happening around us. Is that clear-headedness is something that I'm attracted to, but I feel and have felt, and so it's exciting that you help put words to that. I'd never heard that before. In terms of your own personal journey of agency, like I really like this program to be around choices so that people can actually make better choices, having heard us. Where are you headed, Michel? And what are the things, how are you having to change, if at all, for where you're headed?
Well, this is an interesting question and a bit difficult to answer for me. So if I look at the past, the first period was just like studying, trying to find, the basic ideas that I would follow. And then I really went through a long period, 7 years of really hardship, because I was living in Thailand. I couldn't wine and dine with people, didn't have funding. So that was a very difficult period until 2014. And two good things happened around that time. So one was I was invited to go to Ecuador and do a big consulting project with 6 people, developing a commons transition plan for the 3 official institutions in that country. And basically that put us on the map, because once you have a big project like that, then people think, oh, this is not just ideas or utopias, this is something that should be taken seriously, right? And then the second thing was that as the world was changing, the stuff that people were looking at me like, what is he saying? It's like, we can't see what he's talking about, basically. So all that started really changing rapidly from 2011, the Occupy and all these things. Whether you like those things or not, they were expressions of this kind of networked forms of organization, right? Anyway, so those 2 things got more and more interest. But I must say lately, I'm kind of in a new difficult period in terms of, so I have to admit that I've been on the left of the spectrum. But what I'm seeing that is happening is something that I don't like to see at all. So I see a double crisis developing. I see, if you say, I know it's a bit of a simplistic view, so I'm sorry for the people if they don't feel they recognize what I'm saying. But what I feel is that on the right side of the spectrum, there's a lot of issues that are ignored. So it would be very hard to have a conversation about inequity, about ecological transformation, things that I think are fundamentally necessary if you want to survive as a species. On the other hand, what I really appreciate today, especially on the center right, is that the ideas of the Enlightenment, of civil rights, are no longer questioned by the vast majority of the people on that side of the spectrum. On the other side, with all the sympathy that I can have for what is happening right now in terms of social movement, because everybody knows that there is inequity, there's also a lot of things that I find problematic, and especially the identity turn, right? And I want to explain to you why this is problematic for me as a commoner and a peer-to-peer. If I want to work with you, so we call it a commons of capabilities, or we call it equipotentiality. So we are not judging people as a whole. We're just saying, in this system of collective production, you're very good at doing this, and this is what I appreciate in your contribution, right? So that's it. We don't judge anybody on any exterior aspect. It's a collective system, and you're able to contribute to the collective goals of that system. So if you do free software, you have to be a good developer. So we have to be seen as persons that can contribute to the common good. And so there, of course, the problem is that for all kinds of reasons, not all the people have learned these capacities, and that's because of the inequity of our system. But if you go too far to the other side and you're saying, I don't want to work with you because you're privileged, or you're old, or you're male, right? And I've been hearing that so much lately that this makes me really uncomfortable, because what is coming out of this, the ideology, is the idea that you're not a person. What you're saying is simply an expression of your privilege, right? So no matter what you say, I'm not going to listen to you because you have certain external characteristics. And for me, that's a real handicap if you want to do commoning, because we have to be able to interact as peers. We can't judge each other on biology or gender. We have to judge each other on our capacities, and if we don't have those capacities, we have to help people to get these capacities, right? This is what I call a commons of capability. Okay. And so I think that, this is a part of my theory, again, but the kind of world I seek to establish is to look at common good institutions, institutions that take care of the whole of society. The thing that they should do is, and it's different from the debate between the left and the right, where the right says we need equality of opportunity, and a lot of people on the left now say we need equality of outcome. What I'm saying is a bit different. We need equality in the means of getting the outcome. I hope you see what the difference, right? So everybody in our world has to have the same capacity, to have tools and capacities, so that he can develop these capacities, right? So if you don't have good public schools or good schools in general, if you live in a poor neighborhood, obviously, talk of equal opportunity is a bit empty, because you don't have the means to realize that opportunity. So I think this is what we're talking about. We're not saying everybody should be the same. What we are saying is everybody should be helped to have this, a particular capacity that can serve the common good. And your own aims, of course.
Right. I think, I'm sure I'm not unpacking it accurately, but in terms of helping people get access to this, one thing I'm hearing is that since 2011, as things have been evolving, this particular moment in time is the most polarizing. And at one point, the technology was great because it created a level of anonymity, which allowed capacity to come to the surface. And now things are becoming more personalized, which on one level is useful, but now it's dangerous because the gift of capability is as the barrier to access that capability is the personal. Is that, am I doing any justice to this, or correct my?
No. Okay, what I'm saying is that at the same time as there's a call for diversity, which many of us can support, there is also a tendency towards a requirement of conformity in ideological terms,
that's
right?
really useful.
And so what people are judging online is your opinions and the expression of your opinions, and they are what's called tone policing and being triggered, etc., etc. And this is creating so much polarization that we no longer see each other as persons, but as enemies.
Right.
So a democracy can live with adversaries. So people you disagree with, right? But once you move to enemies, then you are actually preparing, something much more violent, right? And I don't think democracy can survive seeing each other as enemies. And this is what is happening now. So if you look at racism, and I agree racism is systemic, but I don't agree with the way that systemic is now understood.
Yes, understood.
But let me just make that argument. So only 10% of white people today would have an objection of their children marrying somebody from another race, right? So this is a dramatic increase of a particular kind of racism, which was focused on, skin color, etc. On the other hand, more than 60%, I believe, maybe it's 50%, or it could be actually higher, I forgot the exact figure, of Republicans and Democrats don't want their children to marry somebody from the other political tribe. You see what I mean? So that's kind of, that level of polarization is really problematic. And so what we need to do, and we're still succeeding in this in the Commons, but it's becoming difficult, is the idea that, okay, if we are working together on a common object, so we want to make free software, open designs, we want to do something together that's important and good for the world. What we need to do there is to put under brackets some of the things that divide us, right? So I'm more on the left, but I have to be able to work with a libertarian developer, free software developer, because we both want to make the same open source software.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does.
If I want to do an urban commons, maybe, have access to healthy organic food, and we do collective purchasing, we have to work together to get that going. And maybe I'm for abortion and you're against abortion, but we have to put that on the brackets because we both love the same mission and purpose of our commons project, right? And this ability to put things on the brackets is what is being endangered right now. There's so much pressure for polarization that we start seeing people only, as good or bad, righteous or not righteous. And within each tribe, this puts enormous pressure, on the dissidents, right? So I'm pretty sure, like if you look at the Republicans, that it's almost impossible to be against Trump, right? Since a few years. Like if you're not for Trump in the Republican Party, you would have a very, very hard time because, people would attack you. And it's the same on the left. Right. It's a bit different, but the same processes are happening on both sides of the spectrum, leading to kind of a call for conformity and to be faithful to your tribe. And the people in the middle, or who are not all the way, in one or other direction, are the ones that feel pressure to either, just overtly play the game, like pretend that they agree with everything the tribe is saying, and that leads to what is called virtue signaling. Like you're going to attack other people simply to show that you're on the right side.
Right.
So these are, in my view, very unhealthy developments. And I think they're produced by the anxiety that our system is producing. So there's too much social inequality and there's too much ecological disruption. If you're young today, I don't think you can project a future. So no matter, even if you're privileged because you come from a middle-class family, you probably already know that you won't have as good a situation as your parents. But less and less people are able to project themselves. And therefore, you have this rising of anxiety, which is then fed by the social media. Because, when you're on social media, what happens is when you write something that I don't like, I don't see your person. I'm very quickly in a microsecond assuming that you are like this and like that because of what you write here,
Right.
which actually may even be a misinterpretation on my side. And so all these algorithms are feeding, that strife,
Right.
because what they want is keep the attention going, and the more you keep your attention going on social media, the more advertising they can present, right? So it's like a perfect storm, and this is why I'm answering your question by I'm feeling disturbed by this, and I find it harder to work now than, let's say, 5 years ago,
Right.
because people are very, very divided, and I'm a curator, and so the number of people who are telling me, "Oh, you can't post this because," and they don't even disagree with the article, they don't want to the source,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're on the left, the egalitarian left, you will say, "I don't want to see anything from Quillette and IRO." Others will say they don't want to see anything from the New York Times and the Washington Post or CNN, and still others will say, this or that, and that wasn't there 5 years ago.
Right. Or even 2 years ago. I mean, I've been on your platform, been following. I hadn't seen any of it except for 2 years ago. But um, in terms of agency, we both admire Eleanor Ostrom and the work that she did with the Commons in terms of governance. Is there any, for all of us that have platforms that are working to create dialogue, is there one or two principles that you think are still useful even with the polarity today to help us be stronger?
Well, one of the things that Ostrom really insisted was the negative side of the commons. And she insists that one of the principles of governance, I don't remember how she phrases it, but there needs to be consequences. Let's say if you have a forest and you're overusing your part that you agreed on, then there are gradual sanctions. I don't forget. I mean, I don't remember how she phrased it, right? And what we first thought is that because the newcomers were mostly immaterial. With immaterial, we mean that if you have a piece of knowledge, you can, whatever the cost is to produce it, once you have it in digital form, you can just spread it around infinitely at almost the same cost as making it the first time, right? So what we thought then was that we don't need these negative rules because there's actually no tragedy of the commons in cyberspace. So that was the idea. It's abundant, so we don't need to have these graduated sanctions. And I don't think today, with the level of disagreement and trolling and fake news and all of that, I don't think it's possible to hold on that. So you really have to defend your community.
Mm.
You have to be able to tell somebody, if you're racist, if you insult people, if you come with personal accusations that that are not provable, you can't do this here because you're harming our community ability to function over time, right?
Right.
And so you need to take some measures. And so that's something I learned that Ostrom said from studying, I don't know how many centuries of physical commoning, and that we thought didn't apply to virtual commons, but they do apply.
So my son and I recently watched Beowulf, and it was a really great movie. And I'm thinking it's almost as if we used to have rules about participation, and now we're starting to actually clarify rules around what would have you not participate, and that defining why you might be excluded from a group is now as important. It's probably been important the whole time, but I'm hearing you say that's an important part of where we're going. You are a father.
Well, sorry.
Oh, no. Go. Do you finish your thought there? Then I have one last question before we close this off.
Well, I just wanted to say that the logic of the commons is a contributory logic, right? Yes. So if you're part of our community because you contribute to the purpose of our community. So making free software requires that you contribute to make that free software or to the conditions that are necessary to do our work together. Wow. But there's something like an anti-contribution as well. We are recognizing a lot of people online are not there to disrupt. And so you need some defense mechanisms against those negative contributions. That's what I'm saying.
I'm almost thinking like a whole slideshow could be participation versus contribution, because I just love, it's just now coming to me now, the idea that, you may participate, it may or may not be useful, but having the intent to contribute is really an active choice of agency. And so I'm like, wow, that's a whole new conversation.
Yeah.
And what I want to leave with is your I hope this
go ahead.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. We're running out of time. You're a father also, and a husband, and you get inundated and you read a ton. How have you created designs to help support your ability to still have silence, to think and hear your own thinking? How do you do that?
Well, okay, this is very pragmatic, but I decided to start my day with reading. So what I found is that if you're active on social media, you're always reactive. So it's, tack, 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 every post, every reaction. And so your consciousness is being really kind of fragmented in very kind of elementary, instinctive, emotional ways. It's like your reptilian and mammalian brain are being targeted. I used to think that about TV, and I used to think that the internet was different, but the way that Facebook and everything organized the social media was actually designed to have the same effect, the likes and all that stuff. So that's one thing I do, is to make sure that I start my day reading and thinking. And then I also have another little discipline, might sound ridiculous, but that's the way I'm doing. So I'm thinking, okay, the web is for trend watching, feeding the zeitgeist. Where are things going? What are people doing right now? Then if you read an essay, this is something that people have been working on for a few months in their lives. But when you read a book, people have been working on this, for years sometimes, right? And then it takes a long time to get through the peer review. So I don't know if you get the sense of what I'm doing is, it's like you have to make sure that you're not in a presentist mode all day long. Right. You have to really look at history, the long term, and you have to make sure to make place in your life to be in different temporalities at the same time, and to make sure that you make time for the different temporalities. Right. And that includes, time for being with your loved ones. And of course, I have the immense privilege to work at home. And, before COVID, to go regularly pick up my kids. And so this maintains like a level of, regular intimacy and that is possible because you work at home. It would be a lot more difficult,
right?
If you have a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 7 job.
Right. This may be way too basic, but I'm thinking, unfortunately, the analogy I'm thinking of is probably not appropriate, because it's about ribs, that the ones that have soaked for a very long time taste better. That, there's something, and gosh, Scott, I'm really blowing this, but I love that you started with the idea that when you were working in corporate, they could only see a 90-day trajectory, and that you're making sure that you're experiencing nutrition from reading of things that really took more than 90 days to put together. And that makes a lot of sense.
Can I say one more thing?
Please, help me, save me from this moment.
This is not recommendation for anyone, but I eliminated all my apps on my smartphone. Yes. So it's not really a smartphone anymore. But the way I reason about this is, I'm online so many hours a day. And so when I close my computer, I really don't want to be interrupted anymore. Right? So you have a time for work, and you have a time when you're not working. and you close off the channel that reminds you of your working, and you know, your connectivity and all the expectations that people have. So, and then the other thing is, and this is something I react strongly against, is, you know, when you're with people, like when I'm in a conference, I don't open my computer. I'm there to listen to you, and to have a connection and to talk physically face to face. And I see all these other people, you know, working on their computers. You know, maybe they're taking notes, but most likely they're answering their emails, and so their attention is no longer where they are. Mm-hmm. There is a split between mind and body, which is appropriate in certain circumstances. But we have to learn to have boundaries. And you know, cells have membranes, right? It's the membrane which makes you a separate cell. Mm. If you don't have a membrane, you're the Borg.
I mean, mic drop. I don't think there's another way to close besides that really wonderful way. You all have been listening to Studio A3R. We've had I think an appetizer of many more conversations to have with Michael Bauwens, founder of the P2P Foundation, also a steward to thought and the time to think and the importance of creating that space. I'm so thankful to have Scott Fitzgerald from ROC Vox as our producer, and I hope you all have a good week until our next program. Thank you very much.